Stop walking away, cowboy. Tribal custom says you touched my hair. Now you have to stay forever. The rope was already coiled on my saddle when she said it. I had one boot in the stirrup. Gray morning frost on the grass, the kind of cold that gets into the seam of your jaw and stays there. My horse, a grulla gelding I'd been riding since the Cimarron country, was blowing steam through his nose and shifting weight like he was ready to go too. We'd both gotten good at leaving. Me and that horse. Quiet and early before the camp stirred, before anyone noticed or cared enough to say don't. That was my custom, not tribal law, just mine. She was standing maybe 15 feet behind me. I don't know how long she'd been there. Her name was Walks Before Rain, that's what her people called her, and I wasn't about to give her something shorter just for my own convenience. She was Lakota, mid-30s I'd have guessed, her hair loose in the morning, and she was holding a clay bowl with two hands like she'd brought it out for a reason. She said it in English. Her English was better than most of what passed for it west of the Missouri. Stop walking away, cowboy, just like that, even-voiced, not loud. Tribal custom says you touched my hair, now you have to stay forever. I didn't move for a second. Then I took my boot out of the stirrup. I want to back up. Because it doesn't make sense unless you know what I was before that camp, before that woman. Before I came riding out of the Powder River country with nothing except a broke-down reputation, and 3 weeks of trail grime I hadn't managed to scrub off. My name is Cal Ritter. I'm telling you this now from the front step of a log house that I built, which is a thing I never once thought I'd have cause to say. But before the house, before all of it, I was what they call a drifter, which is really just a word for a man who never found a place that wanted him bad enough to make him stop moving. I'd been a cattle drover, a freighter, 2 years as a county deputy up in Chodow, 1 hard winter as a wolfer. None of it stuck, not because I was bad at any of it. I was decent at most of it. But decent at a job isn't the same as belonging somewhere, and I knew the difference because I'd watched other men have it. Men who had a woman who kept the lamp on for them. Men who had a child that ran out the door when they heard hoofbeats. Men who owned the land under their boots and felt that ownership all the way up through their legs. I didn't have any of that. I was 51 years old and I'd spent so long being nobody's particular concern that I'd stopped expecting it. I hit that Lakota camp by accident, or close enough to it. I'd been following the White River south, trying to get to the Nebraska line before the first real snow, and my grulla threw a shoe on a piece of shale. I was walking him when I came over a rise, and there it was, a winter camp, 8 or 9 lodges, a herd of horses on the flat below. A dog barked, then a lot of dogs. The man who came out to meet me was named Red Hale. He was old, gray in his braids, and he looked at me with the particular kind of expression that older men develop for things they've seen too many of. Not hostile, tired. He spoke some English and I spoke maybe 30 words of Lakota, enough to say I wasn't there to cause trouble, my horse needed tending, I'd move on in the morning. He looked at my horse's hoof, nodded, and told me to come in. That was how it started, as simple as a stone. Walks Before Rain was the daughter of a woman named Spotted Cloth, who had been Red Hale's cousin, who had died 2 winters before of a lung sickness. Walks Before Rain ran a lodge alone, her and a daughter about 7 years old named Little Fern, who was bold as a handful of pepper, and had the habit of appearing beside you without warning, which startled me considerably the first 3 times. The first night Walks Before Rain fed me without saying a word to me. Soup that tasted like something I couldn't name, good, just deeply good, with dried chokecherries in it, which sounds wrong but isn't. She moved around her lodge with no wasted motion and no particular interest in me. I was a guest. She was hospitable. That was the extent of it. I slept near the door, which is where guests sleep in those lodges, and I lay awake for a while listening to the camp go quiet. That specific quiet that camps make when they settle, the horses shifting, the fire going low. In the morning, I went out to check on my Grulla and found that someone had cleaned the hoof and shaped a new shoe from a piece of old iron and nailed it cleanly enough that I wasn't sure it wasn't the original. I asked Red Hale who'd done it. He said Walks Before Rain knew horses. I didn't know what to do with that. I thanked him and I was fully ready to go. It snowed. It snowed the way it snows in that country when it means it. 2 feet in about 14 hours, more coming, and the wind out of the northwest hard enough to find every gap in your clothing. Red Hale looked at the sky and told me I'd stay another day. He didn't make it a question. I looked at the same sky and agreed. That second day is when I started paying attention to her. Not in the way you might think, or not only that way. She was handsome, yes, strong jaw, dark eyes that moved quick over everything, a way of standing that said she didn't need anyone's permission to stand there. But what I noticed first was the way she worked. Not hard in a grinding way. Efficient. She knew exactly what she was doing at every moment, and there was something almost restful in watching it. She was tanning a hide outside in the cold, and she had a fire going at the side, and little Fern was sitting nearby, telling her something elaborate that involved a lot of hand gestures. And Walks Before Rain was listening and working at the same time, not ignoring the child and not stopping her work. At some point I got up and helped her stretch the hide without being asked. She glanced at me once and then went back to what she was doing. I held the tension where she needed it. After a while she said, without looking up, that I held things steady for a white man. I don't know why that landed the way it did. Maybe just that it was true. Maybe because it wasn't a compliment dressed up as a compliment, it was just an observation. I told her I'd had practice. She almost smiled. The snow kept me there 4 days. By the 3rd day, little Fern had decided I was her personal audience and took to sitting near me and explaining things about camp life in a combination of English and Lakota that I followed about half of. She was serious about all of it, the way small children are when they've appointed themselves your teacher. Walks Before Rain watched this from across the fire with an expression I couldn't read. Not disapproving, something more careful than that. On the 4th afternoon, I was helping Red Hale reinforce a lodge cover that had come loose at the smoke hole, and I asked him, in the blunt way I have, what he thought of me staying on a few more days. The snow had let up, but the cold hadn't. He looked at me for longer than was comfortable, and then said the camp could use another set of hands through the winter. That was not an invitation to stay forever, but it was an invitation. I stayed. I won't tell you it was all warmth and ease. The first 2 weeks I was a stranger doing a stranger's labor, hauling wood, mending things, helping with the horses. I didn't know enough of the language, and I didn't have enough standing to offer opinions on anything. Some of the men ignored me. A younger man named Broken Cup, who I later learned had some intention toward Walks Before Rain, watched me the way a dog watches something it's not sure whether to bark at. But I could work, and I did, and after a while work is its own kind of language. Walks Before Rain spoke to me more as the weeks passed. Not long conversations. She wasn't a woman who talked to fill space, but she'd come stand near me while I was doing something and say what she thought about it, or ask a question that wasn't small talk. She asked me once why I didn't have a family, not with pity in it, just asking. I told her the honest thing, that I'd been moving for so long I'd stopped being the kind of man a family could get hold of. She looked at me from the side and said that sounded like something a man tells himself. That hit me like a stone in a pool. The rings are still going out. There was a night in the 2nd month when one of the horses came up lame, with a swelling in the foreleg that looked bad. It was past midnight, cold, clear, and brutal, and I'd gotten up for some other reason and noticed the horse standing off from the herd. I started working on it, felt the heat in the joint, got some cold water from the creek running under its thin crust of ice, began the slow business of compressing and releasing. Sometime in the dark, Walks Before Rain was just there, crouched beside me with her hands doing what my hands were doing, neither of us having said anything. We worked that horse through the night. 2 hours, maybe 3. The cold got into me in a serious way, and I could feel my fingers wrong by the end of it, but the swelling came down. As the sky started to gray, she sat back on her heels and looked at the horse and then at me. And in the thin light before dawn, she said, quietly, that I was good with animals, that I had patience. I didn't say anything, didn't trust what might come out. She added, and she looked at the horse when she said it, not at me. That patience was a hard thing to keep when the world had been rough on a man for a long time. I don't know how she knew. I hadn't told her much, but something in the way she said it made me understand she'd seen me, not the useful stranger, me, whatever that was under all the years of moving. I went back to my blankets and lay there until morning, and I will tell you plainly that something had come loose in my chest that I wasn't sure what to do with. I started being stupid about it after that. Careful stupid, the kind where you're aware you're being careful but you're not sure why. I found reasons to be where she was. I found reasons to be useful to her specifically. She was not unaware of this. She didn't call attention to it. But once, when little Fern ran to meet me coming back from the horses and grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the fire, I looked up and caught Walks Before Rain watching the two of them, watching the child pull at my hand, and the expression on her face was one I can still see if I close my eyes long enough. It was not simple. She had a good life in that camp. She had standing among her people, a place, a role. I was a white drifter with no fixed anything who had wandered in out of a snowstorm and hadn't left. There was talk, I knew. I didn't know the words, but I knew the cadence of talk. Broken Cup made his disapproval plain without ever doing anything I could answer directly. I started thinking again about leaving. This is what I do, what I've always done, not from cowardice exactly, from a lifetime of reading rooms and trails the same way. When the situation gets complicated, when you can feel yourself becoming a problem for other people, you go. You spare them the bother of asking you to. It's a thing that looks like dignity from the outside and isn't. I started thinking through it the week before I saddled my horse that morning. I told myself I was being sensible. I told myself she had her life, and it was a good one, and I was just winter wood that would burn down to ash by spring anyway. I told myself I was too old and too worn down and too empty-handed to be anything but a complication. I told myself all of this at great length and with considerable conviction. And then that morning, frost, steam, one boot in the stirrup. Stop walking away, cowboy. Tribal custom says you touched my hair. Now you have to stay forever. I stood there with the reins in my hands. I said, maybe too slow, that I didn't think I'd touched her hair. I'd been careful about that kind of thing. You learn in the West what means what to which people, and you stay careful. She said, and she was looking at me with something flat and direct in her eyes, that 2 nights ago, while she was sleeping near the fire, my blanket had shifted and the edge of it had brushed across her hair. I thought about that. I said that was an accident. She said that it happened anyway. I stood there, the horse shifted. The camp was starting to wake up, a child's voice somewhere, smoke rising straight in the still air. I said, is that really a custom? She said, does it matter? And I want to tell you what was in her eyes when she said that. Not a game, not a trap. She was asking me something real with the door open, and she'd wrapped it in a joke because she was too proud to ask it plain, and I was too scared to hear it plain, and she knew both those things about us, and she'd found the only way through the middle of them. I took my boot out of the stirrup. I walked the Grella back to the picket line. I didn't look at her when I did it. I wasn't capable of it just then. When I came back past her toward the fire, she was still standing there with the clay bowl, and her face was careful now, watching me come. I stopped about 6 feet away. I said, I don't know that I'm worth the trouble. She said, that is the stupidest thing you have said since you got here. Something broke open in me then. Not like crying, I'm not telling you that. More like the sound a fence makes when the strain on a wire finally gets released. Just a kind of settling. like something that had been pulled tight for a very long time went slack. She walked up close to me and put one hand flat against my chest. Not romantic, not pulling me anywhere. Just flat against my chest like she was checking for something. Her eyes were level with my chin, and she looked up at me for a moment, and then she said, plain and quiet, that she'd watched me for 4 months and she knew what I was. That I was a man who showed up and stayed put when it mattered. That I was a man who got up in the cold night for a horse that wasn't mine. That I was a man Little Fern trusted, and Little Fern did not trust easily. She said she was not asking me to be a thing I wasn't. She was asking me to stop leaving the thing I already was. I put my hand over hers where it lay against my chest, both of us still. The camp waking up around us, dogs shaking off sleep, the first good smell of fire and food. I said, I haven't stayed anywhere in 20 years. She said, I know, you can start here. I don't know how to tell you what it felt like to have a woman like that look at a man like me and say that. Not soft words, no cushioning. Just a straight look and a straight thing. She wasn't rescuing me out of pity. She wasn't settling. She was choosing. And the reason I know that is because she'd had all winter to look and she'd looked hard and what she saw hadn't sent her the other way. That's the thing about being seen. You spend enough years being invisible and you don't trust the eyes that find you. You think they're making a mistake. You think they'll look again and correct it. She didn't correct it. I built the house that spring. Red Hail helped me pick the site, on the lee side of a low ridge, out of the worst of the wind, near a creek that ran year-round. Broken Cup said things I didn't fully understand and eventually stopped saying them. Little Fern supervised the whole business with the authority of someone who'd been promised a room and intended to see it built right. Walks Before Rain made exactly one change to my original plan. I put the door facing east the way I'd always built things without thinking about it. She told me to turn it south, toward the sun. Better for winter, she said. Better in the mornings. She was right. She's been right about most things, is what I've learned in the years since. The thing about belonging somewhere is that you don't understand what it costs you not to have it until you have it. All those years moving, I thought I was free. I thought the road was the compensation for the absence of roots. And there is something to it. There is a freedom in having nothing and no one to lose. I don't want to lie to you about that. But there is another thing. The thing that happens when you come home across the flat at the end of a long day and the lamp is on. When someone has left the lamp on for you specifically. Not for whoever might pass, for you. The first time I came home after a 3-day run looking for cattle that had drifted south, and I came over the ridge in the late dark, and I saw that lamp through the window, I had to stop my horse for a minute. The grulla felt me go still and he stood, and I sat up there on that cold flat and looked at that square of light down below, and I did not trust what was happening in my chest. Little Fern is 17 now. She's taller than her mother, and she has her mother's eyes and her mother's habit of saying exactly what she thinks without warning. She came to me last fall with a thing she was working out about a young man she'd taken notice of, and she sat on the front step and talked it through with me, and after a while she leaned against my shoulder like she'd been doing it forever. I sat very still. Walks Before Rain doesn't say much about the big things. She never did. But there are mornings, cold mornings like the one we started with, frost on the ground, steam in the air, when she comes and stands beside me with a cup of coffee and we look at the land, the herd on the flat below, the ridge changing color as the sun comes up behind it. She stands close enough that her shoulder touches mine and we don't talk. I was 51 years old when I stuck one boot in that stirrup and got talked out of it by a woman with a clay bowl and a straight face, and something like 70 words of argument. I'm 63 now. I'm standing on the step of a house I built, on land I know by heart, next to a woman who looked at the worn-out drifter I was and said, without softening it, that she saw what I was, that she was keeping it. There's frost on the fence rails. There's smoke going up from the chimney. The grulla, old now, 20 and some years, a little stiff in the mornings but still eating well, is standing at the near end of the pasture looking toward the house like he sometimes does. Her shoulder is warm against mine. I stopped walking away. Turned out that was the whole job.